Just talking musicals with you. Hello, I'm Lesley Ann Knight and welcome to Just Talking Musicals and to the second part of our behind the scenes peek at the Cole Porter musical Anything Goes. In the last episode, we saw how the producer of the Alvin Theatre, Vinton Freedley, cooked up a plan to reverse his ailing fortunes after the historically grim stock market crash on Wall Street and the ensuing depression-hit years of the 1930s, by coming up with the idea to set a musical on board a luxury ocean liner. We left off last episode with the very probable prospect that Freedley's plan, hatched while he was allegedly hiding from his creditors on board a fishing boat in the Gulf of Panama, no less, was actually really going to come together. His brazen ploy of hiring his talent by luring them in with big showbiz names who were actually yet to be approached worked. And we rejoin the story now with all the production team and cast ready to start work on this glitzy new show. However, there was just one more teensy-weensy obstacle they had yet to overcome. In the timing for this show was also incredibly tight. Freedley only began to assemble his cast and production team in August 1934, and at that point it was just an idea without a book. There was just a sketch of a story and some songs, and they had a mere 3 months before they opened in November. In theory, they had time. After all, so many of the reviews and vanities of the past had been put together in an equally short space of time. But this show needed to be different, and it had to be a success. With the original scriptwriters P.G. Woodhouse and Guy Bolton now busy with other projects in Europe, the newly formed writing team of Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss set to work with the rewrite, and Cole Porter duly arrived in New York for the start of rehearsals. In contrast to most shows where actors are cast as being most like the characters they're going to play, this show cast the leading roles and then tailored the roles to suit the personality and idiosyncrasies of the chosen actors. William Gaxton, who was cast as the leading man, Billy Crocker, was a popular character actor of the day, with great comic timing and a penchant for various disguises. He was a star of vaudeville, theatre and film, and would often even ask that one of his songs be cut in favour of working a comedy moment into the act, which explains why his song, Easy to Love, was cut from the original show, not to reappear until the 1987 Broadway revival, some 53 years later. Victor Moore, who was to play the gangster Moonface Martin, was a star of stage and screen, having appeared in over 50 films and 21 Broadway shows in the course of his career, and in 1934 his career was in full flow. The elegant Bettina Hall, with a fine singing voice and a hitherto well-known star of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, was chosen to play the socialite Hope Harcourt. But there was one person in this lineup of leading roles who was relatively new to the limelight. Ethel Merman was set to play the leading lady, Reno Sweeney. Having started out singing in nightclubs in the 1920s, her very distinctive voice had gained her notice in all the right circles, and she soon found herself replacing Ruth Etting in Follow the Leader, alongside none other than Ginger Rogers in 1930. This was swiftly followed by a part in George and Ira Gershwin's musical Girl Crazy, singing none other than I Got Rhythm. So in 1934, Ethel Merman was 26 years old and very much on her way. Meanwhile, this new show finally went into rehearsals in September, with only a fraction of the first act on paper. Cole Porter had by this time provided the outline of the score and apparently had to sit tight and wait for each scene to be written so he could work out the various scenarios for the remaining songs. Oh yes, and another thing, they still hadn't even come up with a title for the show and were working with titles like Crazy Week and Bon Voyage. But it seems nothing was set in stone. Robert Alton, one of the most successful choreographers known to Broadway and Hollywood, had also taken up Vinton Freedley's challenge and joined the team, as did scenic designer Donald Enslager, who, along with Cole Porter, each had to sit tight and wait patiently to find out what happened next or went where in a story that was yet to be written for a show that was due to open in a matter of weeks. In the end, The first act was written in 10 days. The second act was written while the actors were rehearsing the first, and the final scene wasn't written until Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss were on the train to Boston on November the 5th for the opening night of the tryouts. Honestly, talk about stressful. And it seems history has leading man Mr. William Gaxton to thank for finally providing the name of the show. It was tradition for stars not to make their entrance too early on stage to create the necessary build-up of anticipation and excitement before their eventual appearance. But with this show, Krauss recalled asking Gaxton if he'd mind making his entrance within the first few minutes of curtain up. And Gaxton replied, "In this kind of a spot, anything goes." They jumped on the last two words. That was it! Anything goes! Of course it did! And the very next morning, Cole Porter arrived at rehearsals, complete with the big title number for the show and one of the most memorable melodies of the decade. In later years, Cole Porter described Anything Goes and Kiss Me Kate as his two perfect shows. Anyone watching the sheer chaos of rehearsals and writing in those few short weeks that led up to opening night in November 1934 must have thought everyone to have taken complete leave of their senses in believing they could make this jumble of ideas work. And yet it seems they never lost sight of their goal. Of course, at the centre of all this frenzy was some stunning songs by Cole Porter, like I Get a Kick Out of You, All Through the Night, You're the Top, Buddy Beware, Blow, Gabriel Blow, and the late entry finally gave the show its title, topping off the end of Act 1 in a veritable explosion of song, dance and vibrant energy. Anything Goes. And here's another thing. Traditionally, composers tended to draw their audience into the beginning of a story with strong, reliable chorus numbers. But this time, Cole Porter had Ethel Merman sing I Get a Kick Out of You, a potential hit song, within the first 5 minutes of the show. Allegedly to ensure some of his society friends, who were rather too fond of swanning in 5 minutes late in order to make a grand entrance, and he told them if they did, they'd certainly miss the show's best song. The songs are brimful with cultural references of the day, which seem never to have aged with the passing years. Furthermore, they reflect back to a glittering bygone age, as if we were flicking through old news stories and catching up on all the gossip. After tryouts in Boston at the beginning of the month, Anything Goes opened at the Alvin Theatre on November the 21st, 1934, to a roar of approval from one of the most glittering first night audiences the Depression had ever seen. And a rather youthful Ed Sullivan wrote of the opening night in his column, "Many gorgeous girls and so many orchids, limousines clogging traffic, long lines of curious, special details of police at the Alvin, flare of photographers' bulbs." So exciting. But that's it for today. Next time we'll delve further into whether all the critics felt like Ed Sullivan, and how Miss Ethel Merman fared in her first major show, and whether it was actually possible to keep a big, glitzy musical on Broadway for more than a week during one of the biggest recessions the world has ever known. I'm Lesley Ann Knight. Behind the camera is the wonder that is this show's producer and director, Katie Ridout.
Hello.
Woo! You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, and we're lurking on Twitter as well under the name of @KnightandRidout. Oh, and don't forget, as usual, to click the subscribe button for each new episode alert so you can bag the best front row seats for each new show. See you here again very soon for another instalment of Just Talking Musicals.
Just talking musicals, musicals with you.
For the start of rehearsals.